Welcome to The Story. I'm Tim Gordon in for Pat Doris tonight. Well, even before Oregon's short legislative session this year, the wheels were turning to make changes to Measure 110, the law that decriminalized user amounts of hard drugs. There were bipartisan assurances that something would be done, and we're getting our first look at a compromise taking shape behind closed doors. It is our big story tonight. Well, the bill you'll want to keep an eye on is titled House Bill 4002. Within the last hour or so, the new amendments were posted on the Oregon Legislative website. One amendment is 137 pages, and the other is 145 pages, so we're still getting through those ourselves. But even yesterday, the details of this compromise between Democrats and Republicans started to seep out of Salem. When it comes to recriminalizing drugs, a new class of misdemeanor would be created by this bill, striking a sort of balance between the Class C misdemeanor the Democrats originally wanted, which is punishable by up to 30 days in jail, and the harsher Class A misdemeanor that Republicans sought, which could land you behind bars for a full year. Now, this new unclassified misdemeanor would allow people to avoid a criminal record by completing drug treatment. And if convicted, they would not receive immediate jail time and instead get probation. But defendants could be jailed for up to 6 months for violating that probation. Well, OPB reports that even then, someone could be released from jail in order to take part in drug treatment. If this bill passes, those penalties would not begin until September. Another element in the original bill was mandatory deflection programs, meaning that a police officer would have to offer someone treatment before arresting them. Law enforcement was not a fan of that prospect, and this new amended bill makes those deflection programs optional for counties, which could create a system to route people to treatment instead of an arrest. So it's clear that the baseline of these changes is still treatment. But if we use the popular carrot and stick analogy, Measure 110 took away the stick, or consequences for drug possession, and this amended bill would reintroduce it, which, as you might imagine, is not popular with everyone. Here's what the Urban League of Portland had to say late yesterday.
We're in staunch opposition to any criminalization, or recriminalization, I should say, of folks who are suffering. And, from what we've heard is that, this new iterative amendment that we're expecting is quite frankly worse than what was initially introduced.
Well, the ACLU of Oregon also weighed in, saying these changes are regressive and harsh, and that legislative leaders failed to get input from stakeholders and constituents who would be affected by this, and that the new bill shows disdain for liberties, racial justice, and, quote, sound science public policy making. The executive director of the ACLU of Oregon, Sandy Chung, wrote, quote, real solutions to drug addiction are more treatment, housing, prevention, education, non-police mobile crisis teams, and community revitalization efforts. Criminalization is not a real solution. It is a false promise that will inevitably result in more overdose deaths in the Oregon communities that most desperately need access to care. Oregon's legislative leadership is digging a deep, unconscionable, and costly trench of human suffering by recriminalizing Oregonians experiencing drug addiction. Well, the amendment is the expected solution for lawmakers to get this bill through the legislature with bipartisan support. But the big question would be whether or not Governor Kotek would actually sign it if it arrived on her desk. Here's what she told our Laurel Porter well before these amendments were being shaped.
The filter I'm bringing to it is, will this make it better? Will it make it better for the people who need the services? Will our communities be safer? If they can pass that filter, then I can sign the bill.
All right. Well, that was Governor Kotek, obviously, and you heard what she had to say about it. We're getting back to the right spot for our story here. Now, the bill today, I'm so sorry. This is my error. I hit the button and got us too far along in our script here, so I'll get us back where we need to be. Okay, so let's give you an idea of the timeline for this amended House Bill 4002, so you know what to expect. Within the last hour, we learned that a public hearing is scheduled for Monday evening at 5 p.m. And from there, we expect it to move like any other bill would. The committee would hold a work session on Tuesday or Wednesday, and if approved by the committee, it would head to the full House. They would discuss it over the course of 2 days before taking a vote, meaning the new bill could advance out of the House and head to the Senate as early as the end of next week. So what's going through your mind on these changes to Measure 110? We're expecting to speak with lawmakers Monday to get a better idea of all the expected changes, but these are the big ones. Do you think they'll make a difference? Well, you can email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail message at 503-226-5090. All right, moving on. Today, a high-profile official from the Biden administration visited our area. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su was here to talk about federal support for growing Oregon's silicon forest. That, of course, is our semiconductor industry, led by the likes of Intel, Microchip, and others. Secretary Su was joined by Oregon Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici at Portland Community College's Willow Creek Center, talking semiconductor workforce partnerships. That includes training people for jobs in the industry. Well, that's a big goal of the Biden administration and its CHIPS Act. Today, Sue took a moment to pump the 14.8 million jobs created so far under this administration. But she also said job growth, including in the tech sector, needs to come with an eye on equity.
It's a record recovery, and these are all opportunities for communities, especially communities that have for too long been left out when there have been opportunity. And so we have to be very intentional and deliberate. We have to say that this time when we build prosperity, we're not going to leave anybody behind. And that's why programs like those here at PCC are so important.
Now, PCC's got a variety of programs to become skilled in mechatronics, which is a new word to me, so I learned it covers the fields of mechanics, electronics, and computing to create smarter systems. Now, that covers a lot of ground, including engineering skills needed in the semiconductor field. This past Monday, we told you about PCC's program called Quick Start Semiconductor Technician Training. It is a 10-day program that prepares you for an entry-level job in semiconductor manufacturing. But is the industry really stable? Despite growth spurts, we've also seen layoffs and furloughs at places like Intel and Microchip. Secretary Su says federal dollars are a game changer to grow and stabilize the semiconductor business, which connects to all other kinds of industries.
We have not seen this kind of investment in manufacturing in a very, very long time. We have not seen the kind of investments in infrastructure since this country built the interstate highway. Investments in R&D, right? Investments in just a resilient supply chain, that if we can produce things here, then it's not just good for workers, it's not just good for companies, it's good for our national security. And these investments represent really a decades-long change in our industrial policy in this country, and it's happening right here in Oregon. And so we are really laser focused on continuing to have those investments make a difference, but creating opportunity that's not just for now, but for decades.
Now let's talk about a big issue in downtown Portland and surrounding areas: graffiti. Yesterday, Portland police announced the arrest of a man they called a prolific tagger, responsible for hundreds of tags over the span of several years. And we've also done stories on interstate graffiti and vacant buildings that become a canvas for spray paint. And there is a process for the city to try and force property owners to clean up graffiti, but it's cumbersome, to say the least. Property owners all across Portland have 10 days to remove graffiti. If that doesn't happen, the city could issue an abatement notice, which gives the property owner another 10 days to remove it. If that still doesn't happen, well, the city has to get an administrative warrant, pay a contractor to paint over that graffiti, and then place a lien on the property for the amount of the graffiti removal, plus an administrative fee. But earlier this month, Portland City Council voted unanimously to change city code to expedite the process for graffiti penalties. The amendment was introduced by Carmen Rubio, who oversees the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, which is in charge of the graffiti program.
In order for us, through the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, to actually tackle the issue and hold owners accountable, we have to go through an administrative judge. It's a lengthy process before we could actually apply a lien to the property. And the majority of folks that we work with graffiti, the graffiti removal, the property owners, have been great, and we've enjoyed a good partnership in removing. These are for the most egregious owners who are not being responsive to the city about their properties removing graffiti. So, and most of those owners of properties are out of state. So this is a really targeted approach to streamline the administrative function so that we get that turned over quickly and get the fine assessed really quickly so that we have more capacity to do even more. So it's sort of a internal efficiency measure, but it's one that we think that community members will see the benefit of by better service.
Commissioner Rubio there. So instead of getting a judge involved and winding through that system, the new code allows for the most egregious violations to be handled through the city's code hearings office, where an expedited decision can be made, which can include fines. And if those fines are not paid by a certain date, well, they can turn into a lien on the property. Now, many of you write to us about graffiti along the interstate or on signage above the interstate. Well, that would not apply to this code change because this only affects private property.
This is within the jurisdiction that we have, and at Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, we've had this program. We took it over in 2022, and since that time, we've removed over 500,000 square feet of graffiti. So we have a very committed, very engaged bureau that really wants to make the most of the time aspect, and one of those critical features is to do everything we can internally to cut that time down. This is just one lever that we're using. There are multiple tools that need to be employed around this issue. There's clearly the enforcement issue about, folks that are the perpetrators of graffiti, and that is something that's equally important. But for what we can do on terms of the other end, making sure that we remove it in a timely way, that we're responsive to community and business owners and neighbors, this is what we feel we can do to move things along even faster.
Okay, so what's going through your mind after hearing about this change? Do you think it'll make a difference, or does it make a nice headline and you're skeptical about actual improvement on the streets? Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com, or of course you can call us and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Up next on the story, new research shows that polar bears are struggling to adapt to their warming climate in the Arctic. And the data is not coming from educated guesses. Researchers actually put cameras on 20 bears to have a first-person or first bear view of their behavior. Environmental reporter Cale Williams explains what they found when the story returns. Well, polar bears have long been held up as the poster child of climate change. They spend most of their time on sea ice hunting seals, but as the Arctic warms, the sea ice shrinks. And that means the bears are having to seek out other sources of food on land. So a team of researchers fitted bears with cameras to see just how the animals are adapting to their changing environment. Environmental reporter Kel Williams explains more.
Polar bears don't need much in life. They need seals, and they need sea ice to hunt them. But for some bears, those two necessities are getting harder to come by.
One of the most common responses to Arctic sea ice loss has been polar bears spending more time on land.
That's Karen Rode, a research biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. She and a team of researchers from Washington State have been looking at how the loss of sea ice is changing polar bear behavior. To study that, researchers fitted 20 bears with cameras for 3 weeks to see how they were spending their time on land. A polar bear's eye view of how climate change is affecting the species.
Yeah, so there were two primary things we wanted to understand about what they were doing on land, whether or not they were feeding and what they were feeding on, but also how much energy they were expending.
Some of the bears took time to relax.
There were bears that spent 90% or more of their time only resting.
Others took a different approach.
And then a number of bears were active most of the time. Some spent up to 40% of their time eating berries. 2 swam out into Hudson Bay and found marine mammal carcasses. Others were wandering, eating birds.
But regardless of what they tried, Rhodes said there were troubling results for almost all the bears.
Despite this significant diversity in behavior, 19 of the 20 bears in our study lost weight, and they lost similar amounts of weight.
On average, the bears lost more than 2 pounds a day. And that spells trouble for bears in the future. The Arctic is warming up to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet due to humans burning fossil fuels. And some have proposed the bears might be able to adapt to a life with less sea ice and fewer seals to feed on. Rode said her findings suggest that's unlikely.
I think there's a lot of discussion about how, our planet and its species are coping with changes in the environment. And there's definitely discussion that, species can adapt, that adaptation can occur. And I think, what our study found was that there are limitations to the ability of species to adapt.
And the problems polar bears are facing can act as a warning to us all. As the climate changes, our own behaviors are going to have to change too. For humans, that's possible. For bears, it's going to be a challenge.
They have physiology and behavior that can only be stretched so far relative to how they evolved to an environment. So I think polar bears are a really good case study in that.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
And researchers stressed to Cale that all the bears in this study appeared healthy and that bears in different parts of the Arctic are responding to climate change in different ways. Bottom line, though, the most important thing any of us can do for them is to cut down on those greenhouse gas emissions that are warming the Arctic so quickly. All right, thanks a lot, Cale. Up next on The Story, we're going to revisit a 30-year-old cold case out of Vancouver. Back in 1994, a young girl was kidnapped from her home in the middle of the night and later found dead. Now her family is pushing for more DNA testing to find the killer. It's a case that crossed the Columbia with elements here in Multnomah County as well. Details when The Story returns. Welcome back to the story. Well, it's been 30 years since a young Vancouver girl was kidnapped from her home in the middle of the night and later found dead in the Columbia River. Decades later, her family got in touch with our Unsolved Northwest team, still searching for answers and pushing for more DNA testing to help solve the case that spanned from Clark County here to Multnomah County. Julie Calhoun has the story.
We knew she did not run away. We were just hoping that whoever took her would just bring her back.
I can't believe it's been that long. In some ways, it seems like it just happened. This is Misty right here. Kelly Carlson, and I'm Misty's aunt. Got a phone call from my nephew who just said, Misty's gone. He said somebody came in the house and took her.
She was taken out of her bed.
Jeff Sage, who manages the apartment, shows us the window the alleged kidnapper reportedly crawled through, taking Misty while her two brothers slept inside.
He saw the man come in, or the bathroom window, and he was so scared that he laid still, and he didn't hear any other sounds, and then he had fallen back to sleep. When he woke up another hour or so later, Misty was gone. We just started going door to door, checking the apartment complex. Within an hour of not being able to find her, we called the police. The two officers that showed up when we called them that first night were really convinced that she had just run away. It didn't seem to register that, someone had literally broken into the house and then she was gone. They were telling us things like, well, she'll probably turn up, she probably ran away. Misty wasn't the kind of child that would have taken off and ran away anyway. She was a very innocent child. And on the television, there was a news program, and they were pulling a body from the river. We turn, and in pulls the police into the driveway. We knew then that there was something very wrong. To this day, I can still remember it like it was yesterday, seeing her tiny little body there. There were what looked like to me to be bruising. Her hair was still wet. I remember asking the coroner, how long had she been in that water? And he said only a couple hours.
When Misty's body was found, she was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans. Initial autopsy reports show she drowned and had no damage to her feet. Police searched the shoreline and bridge for shoes and a jacket, but they never found any.
And there was no possible way for, an 11-year-old girl to get from her house across that bridge without somebody seeing her. My sister completely just mentally went away. I felt like I lost my sister and my niece that same day.
It really was unsettling. It was very terrifying. It definitely changed our lives. My name is Nicole Peterson. I am Misty May Micheletti's cousin.
It wouldn't be until February.
A month later, before her death was ruled a homicide, when lab reports came back, indicating that in fact she had been sexually assaulted.
Since 2018, the genetic genealogy community has solved over 1,000 cases. My name is Lisa Lewis, and I'm a forensic investigative genetic genealogist. From 1994 to now, the technology has improved so we can get a lot more DNA out of a lot smaller samples. It's really hard for us to even wrap our brains around how small of a sample is needed.
I'm not sure what DNA is left to be able to do that type of technology now. This is information that we're not really privileged to through the police department. 10 years ago, they submitted clothing and there was nothing. But maybe now, with new technology, more DNA could be found.
Vancouver police tell us if there is viable technology to solve Misty's case, they'll use it. Her case is still active and detectives continue to follow leads.
Look at how pretty she is. Not knowing it makes you crazy. After 30 years, I don't know if I'll live to see the closure.
Misty May Micheletti deserves justice. It's time to solve this, and it's time to bring justice to Misty and to her family. Whoever did this, we're gonna find you. We're not gonna stop until we do.
So tough after all these years. Well, it wasn't made entirely clear in the story, but Misty's body was actually found just off the Interstate 205 bridge on the Oregon side of the Columbia River. And this goes without saying, but if you have any information on this case, even the smallest tip could help. Please get in touch with the Vancouver Police Department. Their tip line is 360-487-7399, or you can send an email to vanpd@cityofvancouver.us. That tip line number again, one more time, 360-487-7399. Well, that is the end of our show on a Friday. Thanks very much for watching. Straight Talk with Laurel Porter is coming your way next. The story team is hopeful that Pat Doris will be back on Monday. I hope you'll tune in on Monday, first to join me on the news at 4, and then welcome Pat back at 6:30 here on The Story. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.